Well, LA was odd because we left Minnesota and we got in the car, my parents, 3 children, and my grandmother, and all squeezed in, towing a trailer across America, heading west. And at that point, I thought California was going to be cowboys and Indians. It's what I'd seen on movies. It was clear. It was an open space. It was free from snow and mosquitoes and all the things that made life in Minnesota difficult. And we got there, and of course, it wasn't anything like that because we moved into a house in Panorama City, which is in the heart of the San Fernando Valley. There is no panorama, but there it was. And it had just been built by Henry Kaiser of Kaiser Aluminium, or aluminum in America. And for those of you who've seen Chinatown with Jack Nicholson, Jack Nicholson drives out into the valley. It's all orange groves. It's just beautiful. And that's what it was up until the year we moved there. And the year before, they chopped it all down and built identical houses everywhere. And that was a bit of a shock. That was not the California I saw in the movies. But the movies were made around us. There were different places. There's a place called Stony Point that was from our house, 20 minutes drive. And a lot of the old TV westerns were shot there. So you could actually go and climb around and fall and do all the things you do in westerns on the actual location, which was really exciting.
Did you have a sense then that that's the world in which you wanted to work, live, exist?
No, I didn't have any. I seldom really have plans. I fall into things. I think, movies were there. They were really very obviously very much part of my life, all of our lives. It was, the world outside of either Minnesota or definitely outside of Hollywood. And when the big, the Ben-Hurs, the robes, all the biblical ones were fantastic because we were in this other world. So I always loved them. I didn't really think seriously about movies until I was I must have been about 14 or 15 at the time. And the local cinema was, 5-10 minutes away. And on a Saturday matinees, all the parents would dump their children there, get them out of the way so they could go shopping. And so there we were, and Kubrick's Paths of Glory came up. And it was like the first time I was aware films had things to say other than just entertaining.
Right.
Made you think. It was about injustice, it was the absurdity of war. And I was watching this while all the 10-year-olds were running up and down the aisles, jumping, wanting more ice cream and everything. And I was transfixed. And I think that was the moment that, boom, these things are powerful. They say things. And I ought to start taking them more seriously than just entertainment.
At what point did Mad magazine enter your life?
Mad was Mad Comics before Mad Magazine. Mad Comics was started in the 50s. Harvey Kurtzman was the editor. The best cartoonists of America were writing there. And Wally Wood in particular was a great cartoonist. His women were so sexy. It was comic book porn for me, basically.
Let's just get this clear. How old were you, Terry?
I was then 13.
Okay.
I was.
And you saw this
I
thing.
wasn't 23 or 4. Because at that point, since porn is so much a part of our world now, and you kind of then the best we could do was the Encyclopedia Britannica, the Greek sculpture section. Venus de Milo was the best I could come up with when it came to babes. But Mad Comics was so funny because it was satirical. It was ironic. It did pastiches of comics. And it turned sort of rather bland Sunday morning comic strips into real socio-political statements, and they were brilliantly funny. They parodied movies. It was, in a sense, it really was, in a sense, the Bible for my generation of cartoonists. We all grew up with it because there was nothing like it.
And that was seeing what was being made with it. I mean, at one stage, it had such an enormous readership, 21 million, I think.
Was it?
Yeah, huge.
Bigger than the Bible.
Maybe,
Fantastic.
Terry. Just for a few days, at least. Was that the point? Was that sort of an epiphany? I belong in this world? Or at least I want to get into this
Yeah,
world.
I mean, it was, well, I never believed I could get into any of those worlds, to be honest. This
Why?
was like, well, because I was a local lad.
Right.
I didn't know how you made the leap into the Olympia of whatever it was, whether it was movies or comics. But what I did do is copy. I learned to draw cartoons, trying to draw like Jack Davis or Wally Wood, any of them. Willie Elder was one of my favorites because Harvey Kurtzman would write these stories. He would lay them out, and then the cartoonist would go to work. And Willie is the guy that would add 10 million jokes to every cartoon frame. Harvey would write something funny, the characters would be funny, but Harvey would fill it up with details, which I think is where I learned to fill the background of my films up with all sorts of things, which maybe people won't even see until the second or third or fourth viewing. That's really arrogance, isn't it? It's like they'll watch it that many times.
Wait till you see this for the 25th time. I'll knock them out.
It was a theory. It was a theory. That's all.
Yeah.
And all of that was there. So, yes, one copied, one admired it, and it took until college where a connection began to form, because a group of us took over the college literary magazine, a really fine publication, poetry, fine writing, and we turned it into a cheap, shoddy comic magazine. And the readership shot up. And we just started playing with it. And we were very much, by then, I was very much influenced by the next, well, not the next, but the fourth magazine after Mad that Harvey Kurtzman did. It was called Help.
Yes.
And we would, we were much inspired by it, stealing things, stealing formats, the ways of doing things. But that was the leap that basically when I graduated with no plan, I had been sending those magazines to Harvey in New York. And he had written a nice letter back saying, "You're doing some interesting work, terrific." And I graduated from college, working at a summer camp, no plans. And
you graduated in political science, didn't you?
Yeah, let's do one. This is like the book where I start telling a story that I get distracted by something and I get into something else. But it's more interesting that way. We can park that one for the moment. No, in college, I got to go to college because I was smart in high school. I was beyond wonderful. I was student body president, head cheerleader. I was king of the senior problem. I was valedictorian. There was nothing I could not do. Anyway, or so I believed. and so I got a scholarship to Occidental College. It's the only way I could go to the school. It was a very fine college, and it was costly. And I got there because I got a scholarship. And actually, it wasn't just purely on my academic credentials. It was also a Presbyterian scholarship because my work in the local church group. So God was very much involved in my advancement, or at least his representatives via John Knox and others. And so I go to college, and it's smart because the first time I was really around rich kids. And because the school was expensive, so either you had to be very smart or have very rich parents to go there. And that really changed so much because at that point, we're talking 1958 now, and that was when practical jokes were still popular. And if you're a rich kid, you can do really expensive practical jokes with very little, and that sense of privilege that rich kids have. I mean, we would do, or they would do, and I would learn to do them, jokes like, for example, you take a room in the dorm and you fill it up with newspaper. You crunch up papers a lot. You need a lot of friends to do this. And you fill it up from floor to ceiling, wall to wall, door to window. And you can't move. It's just full of paper. But then there's another thing you do. You take the bed of this person whose room it is, who is away for the weekend, and you hang it out the window. And you have a rope holding that bed, and you then run it through the window straight through to the door, and you then tie it to the door handle. Now, you pull the door too, but there's one more trick. You've got to pull the pins out of the hinges. So the only thing holding the door in position is the lock. That's it. So the guy, after a nice weekend, comes back, pissed out of his mind, puts the keys in the door, and wham! And that's what we'd do. We would do things like that. I of course, didn't, but the rich kids did. I mean, at one point, they actually took an old Model T Ford and took it apart, reassembled it, put it in the room, and had the engine running when the guy came back. So in that kind of atmosphere, I was inspired, I guess.
Special effects.
Special effects. But what I loved about that kind of practical joke, it was more work preparing and doing it than the ultimate effect.
The setup was bigger
than
the payoff.
The setup was everything. Yeah. And I thought, that's great. And I don't care how destructive the joke was, if the setup was much more work than the end result. That was, and it really made me think very differently about things. But with the humor magazine, we were doing that. There was another thing we did. I was, again, a cheerleader. There's a good thing about being a cheerleader. You jump around, wave your hands, and you're with the girls, which are really pretty girls there. And you're making a fool of yourself in front of a lot of people, just like this. And it was great fun. And this little group of us who had the magazine, we took over what was called the Bengal Board, which was in charge of school spirit. Now, if Goebbels had gone to Occidental, he would have been in charge of just that. Just that. And so we were inspired by the little man with a limp. And we started, well, we didn't start. We just did 1 year. The freshmen would arrive. And that was a time in colleges when freshmen would be hazed. They would have to go through all sorts of indoctrinations, various things to get into the select world of this college. Well, we started the series up in a Greek theater, which was just above the main part of the campus. And we started these torch-lit assemblies. Nuremberg was small time compared to what we were doing here. And the freshmen would be paraded in. It was all done very ritualistic. And then we would, that evening, tell them the traditions of the college and imbue them with all the knowledge that they would need to survive. This was all invented the night before. But what was extraordinary about it, the freshmen believed it all that year, but what was interesting, that's in the same period of time, the seniors who had been there for 4 years had accepted that as a truth. And I thought, the big lie does work. It really does. But we were doing it for fun. We weren't doing it to try to wipe out half of humanity or anything.
I'm delighted there were no pigs involved anyway. So you start sending your cartoons in to Help, and eventually you get a gig there. Yeah. You're working on Help, and then John Cleese comes over to New York as part of a reinvention of the footlights, the Cambridge footlights. You see him and invite him to come in and do an animation with you.
It wasn't, it's called fumetti, which is it's basically like doing a cartoon with all the different cartoon frames, except it's live action. It's photographs. People speak with balloons. That's what the fumetti is, a puff of smoke in Italian. Oh, sorry. And this is what the thing Help was doing. Harvey had invented this, and it was fantastic. In fact, it was kind of how I learned to make movies, because you need actors, costumes, sets, locations, all that. So I was on the lookout, as my job of assistant editor, looking for cheap actors. We could pay as much as $15 a day. And there was Cambridge Footlights. And it was called, I can't remember what it was called.
They looked cheap, you thought?
Yeah, well, there was Bill Oddie, there was John, there was Graham Chapman, David Hatch, who went on to be BBC One, running the show, and Tim Brooke Taylor. And of course, John, as always, stands out from the crowd. And I asked him if he would be in this fumetti that my roommate at the time had written. And that was the beginning of this relationship. What was also interesting, aside, the story was about a man who falls in love, and I believe has sexual congress, with his daughter's Barbie doll, a blonde Barbie doll. Now, I don't want to say anything about John's 4 wives, but...
So, we'll leave it there. There is a little bit of niggle among the pythons, I think it's fair to say.